So this morning, lectures will be given by Professor Kristen Schell from Carleton University, Associate Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, and she's the author of Uncertainty and Quantum Net Zero Energy Model System Chair or at Carleton. Kristen, or Carleton.
Okay, thanks very much. So this there's 3 hours that we have together. The first hour, we're going to do some background, some definitions on what is public policy, and then some examples. And then roughly the last hour and a half is going to be putting that into practice. So type tutorial on an example problem. So the topic today or this morning is integrating energy policy into optimization model. And this is going to be a little bit of a departure from the last few lectures, because though we have formal mathematics and logic and optimization models, I think as you'll see, the energy policy is the kind of the Wild West. It's really up to you to figure out how to formalize that into some logic to include in your optimization. So this will be an informal lecture. Feel free to raise your hand and ask questions if you have any clarification or you have an anecdote from your personal life and work experience you want to share. But let's start with a definition. So what is public policy? So public policy is the set of practices that are both formal and informal that governments employ to address their objectives. Another way of saying that is they use public policy to solve political problems. And political problems can be extremely varied. So some examples include of public policy include formal laws, including constitution, but they also include informal laws, and sometimes even constitutions are informal. But an example would be the United Kingdom's constitution. Public policy also includes more, which are written and unwritten rules and customs, and administrative procedures. So an example of an administrative procedure that's related to energy policy would be in China, or in Beijing in particular, the Department of Motor Vehicles is processing licenses and registrations faster for people who own an electric vehicle than for people who own an internal combustion engine. Another example is regulations. Regulatory policies, other public policies include research and development. A lot of federal money goes into research grants. Many of your professors are working on some of these research grants. And the last type of public policy would be economic policies. So these would be incentives and costs. The first type of economic policy is a fiscal policy. Fiscal referring to like something that can be codified in the tax. So the first example of fiscal policy that we have here in Canada would be the investment tax credit for clean energy technologies. So that is a different way of putting up money to support like wind, solar, hydrogen. The second type of policy would be financial policy, and financial is different from fiscal because financial is just an upfront grant of money. So, for example, in Canada, for doing a loan guarantee, in 2014, the federal government of Canada gave SaskPower $240 million to support their development of carbon capture and storage. And then SaskPower put out their own $1 million to finalize and run that. So what's the role of public policy in energy systems? Energy systems broadly. Some of you work in energy systems and indirectly or directly deal with public policy every day in your work. So our our energy systems are highly regulated regardless of the structure, whether you're a vertically integrated corporation or in Ontario, we have a re-regulated liberal electricity market with a lot of different players. Regardless of the structure, there are multiple and competing objectives for our energy systems. The first one would be reliability. We're all used to being able to flip on a switch and have our lights come on anytime we need it. We can plug in our computer and we expect power to be there. But the second is affordability. We, as an independent power producer or a system operator, you are regulated to provide that electricity at an affordable rate. So anything you do to grow or to add new capacity onto the system will go through your energy regulator. In Ontario, we have the Ontario Energy Board that reviews all proposals for adding new capacity or anything that might add new costs to the system. And because costs eventually trickle down to the bid. We also have the goal of economic growth. Our provincial governments and our federal governments want energy development because energy supports all types of economic growth. We know from our colleagues in economics that increasing energy production also has a direct impact on increasing our GDP. And in Canada, the reverse transition is also true. Growing GDP requires more investment in energy supply and generation. And in our era of climate change, emissions from our energy system are a big objective. So reducing emissions and actually will require quite a bit of new investment. So public policy development that relates to the energy system is also prone to political methods, mostly because you can use public policy as a proxy for other agendas. So you can use public policy to keep the electricity rates low. That is always pleasing to voters. You could also increase rates to generate rents so that you have money to invest in emissions, lower emissions technologies. You could also try and keep the electricity rates high to address inefficiencies elsewhere in the economy. So inefficiencies in the taxation system, or your goal there could also be to create public sector jobs. So which types of policies are usually included in optimization model? The main type are economic policies, because as modelers or as engineers, at least to engineering economics 101, we can include discount rates and future value of money. So economic policies like the investment tax credit for clean technologies in Canada, they reduce the capital cost of the technology and emulating a refundable tax credit. Carbon price is also something that we have still on industrial producers in Canada. We impose a cost on each ton of emissions from a unit, emissions of carbon dioxide. And upfront capital costs within that financial support, like a loan or just a grant. So each of these economic policies are, I would say, today kind of integrated in an unsophisticated manner. We just figure out where these policies impact the cost of the system that we're trying to design. The integration of other types of energy policy still remains at its infancy. So there's a lot of opportunity in this field for you to figure out ways to integrate policy in your optimization models. And we'll look at why it's important to do that right now. So one of the main policies for, let's say, the energy transition has been investment tax credits and production tax credits in the US. So investment tax credits help with the upfront capital costs. Production tax credits basically give you as a producer some amount of money for every kilowatt hour of energy that you generate. In the US, the production tax credit for wind, also known as the PTC, generally vary between 0.03 cents per kilowatt hour to, I think it's 25 cents for 10 years. So a guaranteed revenue stream, and that is what's known as another category of policy called technology push. So public policy related to research and development has also been used to push technologies into the market. They might be too costly for producers to implement because of that affordability mandate or goal of the energy system. You can't just deploy small modular reactors right now because they're on the order of billions of dollars, and we have other technologies that can produce energy cheaper. So one role of public policy is to push technology to market. So that's helping get technology out of energy generation, out of the research and development phase, and into real growth. It also has a secondary benefit of cultivating human capital, so scientists and engineers and training technicians. One program that we have in Canada is the CREATE program. And one way to do that, to push technologies to market, is a targeted procurement strategy. So that could be a renewable portfolio standard that was very popular in the US for a long time. In California has a renewable portfolio standard that requires 60% renewable production from their electricity system by 2030. There'll also be a public procurement of green products, or as we're talking in Canada now, possibly public procurement of carbon dioxide emissions credits. We can also help for export support. So we might want to push technology, support technology developments in Canada with the goal of becoming the global leader in that technology, and also exporting this technology to other countries. So the goal of these types of public policies and pushing them, pushing technologies to market, is to promote economic welfare, but also mainly to generate a market that becomes self-sustaining. So eventually, you don't need the public money to support the technology anymore, and you eventually get a self-sustaining market that pulls more of the technology in. So a good example of this kind of technology push would be with solar photovoltaic and wind energy. And that would be the production tax credit that I was mentioning earlier. So this is a graph of what happened with the production tax credits for wind in the US. And in the US, so on the y-axis, we're looking at the total capacity of wind in the United States. Production tax credit was started in 1992, but it has an end date. So you have, as a developer, you need to get your project online in order to be eligible for these production tax credits by the specific end date that's outlined into the tax code. So these teal lines are the end dates for the various renewals of the production tax credit. There's quite a bit of uncertainty for wind developers on if production tax credit is going to be available to them, and when they needed to get their wind projects deployed by in order to be eligible for that tax. in the first few years of this production tax credit, I would say from 98 to maybe around 2005, you can really see the impact of that policy. So the technology pushed to market. The gray here are the additions of capacity that met deadline. And you can see that the additions here really spike when you have the deadline. So you can see that the developers are rushing to get their wind farms online in order to be eligible for these tax credits for the next 10 years of operation. And then you can also see the kind of sustained market pull that this policy created. So the next few years of increase in wind deployment, there's more wind developers coming online before the deadline to the PTC. But you also see the kind of limits of public policy in deploying technology. So by this graph ended in 2021, this was a renewable phase of the production tax credit under the Inflation Reduction Act that was provided. Here the wind capacity in the US is at 140 gigawatts, but that's almost 5 times less than the capacity that the modeling tells us we need to get to net zero. So there are quite a few limits in what policy can do. So some more energy policy examples. For the United States, we have what's known as the DESIRE database, the database on state incentives for renewable energy. They've been, this is out of the University of North Carolina. They've been tracking renewable energy policies since 2000, and there are over 2,500 different types of energy policies for renewable energy deployment. So that alone should tell you the variety of energy policies that are out there. They're as different as any human brain or any political system could be. Out of those 2,000, we have 138 that are scheduled to continue to 2035. So this is a snapshot from that database. They've tried to categorize what kind of categories or classifications these policies can fall into. And you see like over 1,000 policies are classified as a rebate program. That could be consumer level or producer level. And what we'll come back to later is this renewable portfolio standard. 49 renewable portfolio standards. So most of them are at the state level in the US, like California. Some of them are at the city or the county level. So you can have San Francisco could have its own renewable portfolio standard that might be more stringent than the California one. So energy policy really defies kind of standardized classification. And as you'll see in the example that we go through later today, you really have to read the text of the policy and translate that text into mathematical logic. So, for example, one renewable portfolio standard in Illinois is, it was started in 2008, and the goal is 25% renewable by 2025, then it increases to 100% by 2030, 50% by 2040. And for some reason, they decided to restrict the technologies that are eligible for this portfolio standard. So you might expect wind and solar. Illinois is a agricultural state, so they're also targeting economic growth in agriculture by supporting landfill gas, but anaerobic digestion, possibly at the farm level, and biodiesel. Another interesting aspect of this policy is the technology minimum. we don't need state technology minimum, but Illinois has declared that they want this portfolio of renewables to be at least 45% wind, 55% solar photovoltaic, and of that 55%, they want 50% from the distributed community level, 47% from the utility scale, and then they want a further 3% from brownfield projects. So redeveloping otherwise environmentally damaged land. So this RPS, renewable portfolio standard, has stage targets every 5 and then 10 years apart. Some technologies are specified and some have minimum levels. So we can, in this example, really see how the politics and the competing goals of energy development and economic growth impact of this specific policy. So how do you integrate energy policy into optimization models? I would say you really need to start with your research question. What is it that you want to get out of the model? What do you want to learn from modeling this complex system? Then that determines, once you have your research question, then you know what type of optimization model you need to formulate. It could be as simple as a linear program, or you may be really concerned with specific capacity investments and sizes of units, and then you need to focus on an integer or a mixed integer linear program. Or you may be more interested in markets. So maybe you're modeling the electricity market and thinking about another type of ancillary markets that might have an impact. Then you need to look into some complementary. Or you might be interested in business assets, and you could look at some quadratically constrained models. So we're going to go through 2 examples of how we've done this in the past. And the first one is on renewable energy targets, or also known as a renewable portfolio standard, and renewable energy credit. So the research question here was looking at actually the ancillary market, so the renewable energy credits, and its impact on renewable portfolio standard achievement. So what we wanted to know was, do these renewable energy credit markets facilitate renewable energy target achievements? And then what is the most economically efficient renewable energy target structure? So there's multiple questions at the top of the Illinois example. You can have stage targets. What we saw here mentioned in Illinois applied to the utilities in Illinois as well as independent power producers. Or what we're looking at in this example was, is it better to have a regional target, say all of the firms within one region for Illinois, or we have to target each firm independently? So just for clarification, renewable energy credit is like an environmental benefit of renewable energy production. So the idea behind renewable energy credit market is that you might be able to keep some fossil fuel production within your system if you have another player that is willing to overinvest in renewable energy and sell the environmental benefits of that renewable energy to a firm that hasn't made the renewable energy investment, or maybe it's too small to change its size. And so the idea behind this ancillary market of renewable energy credit purchasing and trading is really to keep smaller independent power producers within the system, not end up with kind of a monopoly. So the way that we model this is a mixed complementary problem. We look at, or one of the MCP, that we're looking at we're interested in market evolution. So we're interested in the electricity market, how much power our firms generate. We're also interested in the role of the renewable energy in the market and the interact with the electricity. So we can model as many generating firms as we want. These could be independent power producers, it could be established utilities. In this example, we look at two generating firms. One firm is a smaller firm that does not yet have renewable energy. And the second firm is a larger firm that already has a lot of geothermal renewable energy that potentially could trade to the first firm using this record. So these firms are maximizing their profits. They're maximizing the sale of their electricity into the power grid, minus the cost of transmitting that on the transmission system. We also allow for investment in renewable energy. So capacity expansions. The smaller firm may elect to invest more in renewable energy. Maybe it needs to in order to meet the renewable energy target. And what is that might have to buy from the renewable electricity credit market. So we're balancing the supply and demand. We're also looking at renewable energy target. Here in this model framework, we're looking at every 5 years. And we started at a 20% target, moved to 40%, and ultimately 75% of the electricity produced within the electricity system might be 75% renewable. We also model the transmission system operator problem, which is maximizing the amount of electricity traded or sent over the transmission network. We use the F matrix, which is another way of modeling DC power flow and limits on the transmission lines. And we clear the markets within the rec market and the electricity system, balancing what's distributed over the electricity system with the sales from each of the firms and the production prepared. So the goal of this analysis was to look at different formulations of the policy. So we were interested in the question of the overall policy of a renewable energy target integrated with a renewable electricity credit target. But there are different ways you could formulate that. You could have a single renewable target goal. So we could have just, by the end of 2050, we want 75% electricity, or we could have multiple stage target from 20 to 40 to 75. That's how most policies are formulated today. And we can have that target applied at the regional level or at the firm level. The idea behind the regional level is that is flexibility. We might be able to keep smaller producers in the market if we don't specifically require each firm to have 75% renewable electricity. And then the last aspect of this analysis is whether or not we have renewable energy credit market or not. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea behind the rec market is also to be able to keep the smaller players within the system. Not put utilities or independent power producers out of business. So we analyze the results of this modeling framework by 4 different metrics. The first metric is renewable investment. So this is a proxy for if the smaller firms are staying within the market or not. And what we see here is that we do see investment, and I mentioned we have 2 firms in this market. This renewable energy investment is aggregated by all firms. But what's happening here is that the smaller firm is investing in renewable energy in order to stay as a player. So they know that they will. They see the writing on the wall, 70 to 75%. It's going to be more costly for them to buy from the debt market than to invest in renewables themselves. So they do make a small amount of investments in renewable energy in order to be able to still plan the electricity. We see that actually more renewable energy investment happens when we don't have a renewable energy credit. So if the goal is to increase the renewable energy deployment, then you might not want this flexibility that we thought maybe was useful. So when there's no rec market, the smaller producer does need to invest more in renewable energy. We'll also look at the amount of renewable energy credits traded. So under this metric, we see that there's absolutely no need for a rec market if your renewable energy target is at the regional level. So if you're that kind of broke the hypothesis that we started with, you make the renewable energy target more broad, then the other player can kind of make the large player makes the investments for everyone within the system to get to the higher target. If you make your renewable energy target at the firm level, meaning each independent power producer, each utility has to meet a 75% target at the end, then you do need this a rec market, because as I mentioned, the smaller firm is only going to invest in the amount of renewables that it needs in order to stay playing within the electricity market. And then it buys renewable energy credits from the large firm. We also look at two other metrics for this policy formation. The first is greenhouse gas emissions. So what we're seeing here is because of the increase in renewable investment, the lower, slightly lower greenhouse gas emissions when we have this RET renewable energy target at the level. But the lowest emissions come at this type of formulation, when we have the renewable energy target at the firm level without a rec market and multiple goals. So you yeah.
Sorry. For the previous slide in the regional with the red market, I'm surprised that there's like totally zero trading. Like I can understand that like the big players do all the work, like they're already there. But I'm surprised that there wasn't any at all that they would go maybe so generous that they would do the whole thing for themselves. Is that the red markets are so much bigger than the independent power producers that like there's bounding errors, so what's the difference? Is that when I think about it?
Yeah, well, it's like an interaction between the two markets happening there. So and probably the number of firms that we have in the model. So we're only looking at kind of a case study of two firms. We have more players and more players, firms with more diverse portfolios might see more trading in the regional level. But in this example, the firm one was so dominant that it was a lot cheaper for them to make the investments in renewable themselves. And then because of that, you also don't see the price in the rec market rising high enough for them to want to pay. So there's a lot of interactions, and the results that you get out of these models really also depend on the input of what you're modeling.
We see the LORER level scenario that there's a lot more renewable investment or more production that's constructed. Do you model how likely it is for the smaller players to bankrupt or to have one legal that force decreasing production.
Yeah, well, we're maybe that'll go over to the next topic. So we are modeling producer surplus. So we're looking at if the firms are making money or the consumers are. So that'll be the second part here. So let's start the next slide. What we in well, answer the question. Okay, so here. So what happened in this model and this the players that we're looking at is that the most you could say the most stringent form of the policy resulted in the best benefits, which is a little bit counterintuitive. So there's no rest market, there's no flexibility in creating that resulted in the lowest greenhouse gas emissions here. And that is also partly because of the demand. So inside the market, we're also modeling consumers' demand and their willingness to pay different prices. And so here we have slightly lower greenhouse gas emissions here, also because consumers moved on the demand curve. So we have they were willing to pay a little bit higher prices for lower energy. We've also reduced the overall energy that's been supplied. But look at the profits for each firm from 1 to 2 under all different scenarios. And to your question, we do see lower profits for the second firm, which is the smaller firm that had to make investments in order to stay in the electricity market, but overall, the highest social surplus. So according to the demand curve of this model, we've actually, the firms in the electricity market and the direct market have really maximized their producer surplus. So there's very little consumer surplus. It's also a result of the fact that they're making investments in order to meet renewable energy targets. So the producers have a goal of maximizing their own profits. So what we found with this modeling effort is that the most stringent version of the policy would be having that renewable energy target at the firm level. So each firm needs to be able to be at 75% renewable energy production. Without a renewable energy credit market, actually maximizes social surplus. So if you're a policymaker, generally that is the metric that you're looking at. You're looking at maximizing overall economic benefit. So in this example, we looked at 8 scenarios of a renewable energy target formation. The results there were for an uncongested transmission network with the possibility to expand renewable energy. And we had multi-stage renewable energy target at the firm level and without a renewable energy credit market. Probably the policy formation that would be chosen in the real world, because it's the surest way to increase renewable energy investment. And the overall underlying goal of these renewable portfolio standards is to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. So having a renewable portfolio standard was considered politically more feasible than setting a carbon cap for a greenhouse gas emissions. So this formation sees the most increase in renewable energy investment. And this stringent target actually forcing smaller firms to invest in order to make competitive in the electricity. We also saw that with the 2 firms that we modeled, the regional renewable energy target renders that rec market surplus. little longer investments. So just another overall finding is that not all policies, either individually or collectively, are efficient. So I'll move on to a second example of information. Same thing as questions on it.
Always do enforce a regional target. As I understand at the firm level, you can say if you pollute too much, you're gonna have to pay something, but if you're a region, who pays? Like, why as a company would I want to make an investment for my region meets their goal?
Yeah. So I guess it goes back to our first definition of public policy. So these regional targets would have to be codified as law. So there would presumably be either you have norms in your society that you follow the law, or maybe your norm is punitive measures for not meeting the target. So there would be not ideally, but if that were the case, you would have something in the law that has some kind of fines, and the fine for not meeting the target, you might have to decide what would be a relatively fair and equitable fine, or the share of the regional target that is maybe by the size of your company should be met. So yeah, we didn't model that explicitly here, but it would be an aspect of the policy that could be modeled. How to enforce a regional target in the most economically efficient way, fair.
What's the price methods on the different scenarios where the policy effect price constraint also?
Yeah, in this example, the electricity price was pretty stable, around $38 per megawatt hour. Okay. So I'll go on to a second example, and this question we're looking at investment tax credits, carbon price, and achieving net zero emissions. So the specific research question for this model was, we wanted to understand what role does direct air capture carbon dioxide play in achieving net zero emissions. So we're looking at have a portfolio of possible energy generation technologies that can help us get to net zero. It could be wind, solar, hydrogen. We want to know what role does that play, and what type of policy portfolios can help aid in DAC deployment. So direct air capture of carbon dioxide is a very new technology. It's still really at the pilot stage, and it's what we modeled was the liquid solvent technology, which is developed here in Canada by Carbon Engineering and being developed in Texas now at a megaton scale. It's literally a bunch of fans that bring in ambient air, contacted with the liquid solvent, capture the CO2 out of it, and then you have to regenerate the carbon dioxide to a pure stream and sequester. So the question here also has to do with the energy intensity of direct air capture of carbon dioxide. This technology requires a huge amount of energy to be done. So we have a trade-off here in investing in clean energy to meet net zero, or over investing in clean energy to also deploy direct air capture. So what we wanted to know was, what's the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions under these different policy scenarios, and what's the evolution of electricity price? Okay, so this work was sponsored by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the modeling that we presented was completed by Eric Arwa. He's also here, so if you have questions, you can ask it. Now, what's that? And the policy portfolios and impacts can also be explored on our project website. So what we did for this model was to develop a capacity expansion model. So we're specifically needing a net zero target, which is zero emissions by final move. And when we started this modeling effort, the Canadian being electricity regulations in Canada were supposed to be net zero electricity by 2035. That's the target. So we looked at possible capacity expansion annually to 2035 in order to get to net zero. We also analyzed 13 different policy scenarios. And the policy scenarios, we wanted to understand what was the best type of policy to help push back into the market. Though direct air capture of carbon dioxide is really energy intensive, Environmental Climate Change Canada had a question of maybe this is the type of technology we might want to ask. We become the technological leader. And if the rest of the world doesn't do their due diligence on their Paris agreements, we may have to globally start taking CO2 out of the atmosphere to mitigate the impacts of climate change. That could be a lucrative business for Canada. So we wanted to know what policies were help deploy that. And we looked at policies in a recommendation. Policies of whether or not there's an investment tax credit and on what types of technologies, whether we have a carbon price or not, and whether there's a net zero constraint. And as I mentioned, that direct air capture is represented by this liquid solvents technology. And we also included carbon capture and storage on natural gas plants. In 95% capture, 90% nice. And we modeled the Alberta electricity. We chose Alberta because it's already pretty advanced in terms of carbon dioxide storage. So it has a cooperative CO2 pipeline in order to store the carbon dioxide that's captured underground. It also has interesting politics in terms of renewable energy. So if you take a strict interpretation of the province's restrictions on land for renewable energy deployment, we left with only 16% of the area to deploy renewables. So some of the first thing that we wanted to understand was what do cumulative emissions look like under different policy scenarios? And the F-axis here is cumulative emissions of carbon dioxide equivalent from the first year that we modeled, which was 2022 to 2035. The first bar here on the left is with no business as usual, no policies in place, no tax credits, no carbon price, no net zero. So if we kind of continue with where the trajectory we're on, we see 199 megatons CO2. And the interesting finding is the impact of having a carbon price. So not just having the carbon price in play, not having a net zero, no tax credits, we see about a 35% reduction in CO2. So we do, for other reasons that we'll see in the next few slides, having the carbon price, a graduated carbon price, actually really impacts our emissions and influences the rest of the technology portfolio. This gray area here are a set of policies where we don't have the carbon price at all, but we do have investment tax credits and a net zero required for 2035. So what happens here? The investment tax credits we vary whether they apply to certain technologies or not. So we looked at having an investment tax credit just for that, just for carbon capture and storage. just for renewables, and this P is the current carbon tax credits in Canada, which puts a certain percentage of credits on all of those. We, if I heard it correctly, we model the imports and exports to those. Is that what your question? Yeah.
But all the level almost more looking at it. Yeah, and that needs also finishing.
We model like the average emissions factors from the neighboring grids and count that in the total emissions. Saskatchewan has there's a carbon intense grid. Okay. So this gray area here is what happens when we don't have it, but we don't have a net zero target. And what happens here is the cumulative emissions under this policy scenario are almost as bad as business as usual, because it's optimal to delay investment until you have to meet this net zero target. So none of the renewables are invested until a year prior to requiring this net zero. So we have a significant amount of accumulating emissions and kind of running the grid as usual for that net zero. What we find, so this bar on the right here shows cumulative emissions under our current fossil portfolio in Canada. We have a range of investment tax credits equal to a range of clean energy technologies. They support direct air capture, support carbon capture and storage, and renewable at different percentages. And we find that is almost optimal in terms of emissions. But if we had just a little bit more support for renewables, so this is a 50% investment tax credit, that is 30%. We can achieve a lower cumulative emissions and a more gradual transition in the next few slides. So these two slides are showing installed renewable capacity across the transition period for different policy scenarios. So this line here is what I was mentioning earlier, the result of not having a carbon price. You put a net zero requirement. You delay your investments to renewables until you absolutely have to, and then you see an increased investment in order to meet the net zero target. When you have this graduated carbon price in Canada, we're at $80 a ton per ton of carbon dioxide, and that price increases $15 per ton every year until 2030, until we reach a maximum of $170 CO2. So having this graduated increase in price, making it increasingly more costly to emit CO2, improves our renewable energy deployment. So we start with basically say the firms in this example see the writing on the wall of the increases in the CO2 price, and will start making decisions to invest in renewable energy from the beginning. And here we're just seeing this start to delay 2 years for wind and solar. And then we wanted to know also what is the impact of an investment tax credit on carbon capture and storage, on natural gas, and have different levels of capture rates. And when we have the investment tax credit, we'll see deployment of higher capture rates. So our graduated carbon pricing policy in Canada yields earlier deployment of renewable energy, and also leads to significantly lower cumulative emissions of carbon dioxide. And when carbon capture and storage is incentivized, then plants with higher capture rates, 95 to 97%, are deployed earlier than plants with the 80%. We also looked at these policies in terms of their impact on average electricity price. you see on the secondary diagrams. And what you can notice was these purple dots. What you notice is we kind of have a lower price. Well, business as usual is the lowest electricity price because it means you're not making more investments. You can work with what you have, and that results in the cheapest cost to consumers. When you have to invest in renewable energy, you have to pass on those construction costs. So we're kind of seeing an average of around 80 to 90 or above. So it depends on the technologies that you import really have an impact on the average electricity price in your system. When you have investment tax credits for renewables, your prices are the lowest. And the lowest electricity price that we see is this policy portfolio of renewable 50% renewable investment tax credit for current carbon pricing and net zero. And we're seeing that the transition dynamics, that average electricity price laid out in this graph here. So we start out, almost all policies start out at around $90 per megawatt hour. And as that support for renewables policy carries out, we see it increase in average electricity prices with a slight increase in the net zero year. So are making delayed decisions achieving net zero year. This next graph here shows us these are all kind of renewable policy scenarios with the carbon pricing and net zero. When we don't have a carbon price, we see we do see kind of a decrease in prices, but then we see that giant spike in prices at the net zero year. So without a carbon price, you may be looking at lower prices until you get to net zero, and you have to make those large investments and you see this huge spike. So this RPY scenario also provides kind of a smoother transition to the consumer as of electricity price as well. So our average annual electricity price throughout the transition and our no carbon pricing with the net zero target results in lowest electricity prices until that net zero is reached. And we wanted to look at these policy packages or portfolios in terms of abatement costs. Electricity price versus abatement costs. So the lower you are, the more economically efficient the policy. And we're seeing that renewable investment tax credit with the price of the net zero is the lowest abatement cost in 30 tons of CO2 and the lowest electricity. This is where we stand with our current policy portfolio. So similar in terms of abatement costs, but a higher average electricity price. And that, maybe construed as kind of the politics of making this public policy and passing. The final thing that we looked at was the Alberta land restrictions. So the government in Alberta has restricted a lot of land in the province and says we can't put any renewable energy deployment on agriculturally significant land, on lands that are maybe aesthetically recognized. That means only 16% of the area is available to wind and solar deployment. So we wanted to look at what that does to overall renewable energy generation. Here, these first two lines are showing what happens when you don't have those land restrictions and when you include direct air capture from the outside and then what happens when you do have this. So when we do have these land restrictions, you see a lower generation from renewable energy because you're forced to move your renewable energy production to lower yield areas. But we're still able to meet this net zero target. So at present, the overall demand in the Alberta electricity system is small enough that the land restrictions can prevent you from getting to net zero.
So when you model land restriction, I guess I like to not the grid of Alberta to ideal low yield region and how the availability of those utilities in the practice.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, we use the kind of like a, well, we use GIS to do the mapping, and then we like translated the area for balancing area. So land restrictions on renewables influence the transition dynamics, and they also increase the cumulative emissions. So they do result in higher cumulative emissions than a non-restricted case, about 31% higher if you don't have direct air capture carbon dioxide, and about 17% less renewable energy. So that, what we found overall is that the direct air capture plays a limited role in achieving net zero because of its high energy requirements and the fact that just investing in renewable energy that's zero emissions to begin with is more. So across these policy scenarios that have different incentives, the biggest role that plays is a removal of about 1.4 megatons of CO2 per year, which is less than 1% of the cumulative emissions associated scenario. So we're really only seeing DAC playing a role in moving residual emissions in the system. So we might have DAC also supports continued use of natural gas production. And by the time we get to net zero, or the year that we reach net zero, you're going to deploy a little bit of DAC in order to emissions from natural gas. Graduated carbon pricing results in CO2 emissions that are 54% to 70% lower than scenarios. And a combination of graduated carbon pricing and that 50% investment tax credit on renewables, as opposed to, so there we also removed the investment tax credit on that CCS. That succeeds in achieving this net zero target, and also the lowest cumulative emissions, the lowest electricity prices, and the lowest have any, yeah.
so like how were you able to achieve like the base load generation to both target if you're net zero?
Yeah.
You're getting more possible, I guess, or
A lot of wind and solar and hydro, and we do not quite a few imports to BC. That's kind of
okay. So did you allow for a definition of expansion between the like these two? It's really well connected with Alberta and the law.
Yeah.
Does it not?
Yeah, in this model, we only did generation extension. We assumed uncongested. Next step will be to actually get.
Okay, so you had like unlimited access to the inverters.
Yeah.
I understand correctly, our discrete here is our company, right? The city.
Yes, this we modeled as kind of a centralized decision maker, so you can think of it as the Alberta
Sorry, is total the carbon capture market storage for have a factory of those supplies to buy as it having a lot of greater customers and not being used to accept this promise.
Well, we didn't model consumers directly, but I can say that this price. What we did was compare the prices to historic prices in the Alberta electricity system, and they average around $38 per megawatt hours. Most markets do, except there's significant periods of time when in Alberta they're up around 120 or 160. because Alberta is an energy only market, it doesn't have capacity. Very similar to the Texas market where there's no provision for maintaining capacity to keep them down. So it's quite often the market is either 120 or 160. So yes, we don't know how to calculate the cost, but the prices are in the things I've seen within Alberta. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so we're gonna take a short break. The next part of this morning is going to look at some practice in Coca-Cola. So we'll be modeling in Python and Iomo. We'll do a little bit of experience with the syntax, and then we're gonna attack a problem. The problem. Yes, model. What's the next part of the lecture here? We're going to be working in Coca-Cola. Has everybody access to the notebook? Everybody try. So there what we do in Python and but if you are familiar with a different language, you can feel free to do that. And then first I want to introduce basics of optimization modeling. I think there are some people who don't have experience with model formulation. So just a reminder, there are 4 main points to an optimization model. You have an objective function that you're either trying to minimize or maximize. You relate your decisions to specific decision ideas that you want to model to decide or calculate out for you. And you relate those via constraints in the model. Your model is also informed that input data and the parameters. These parts of the model to set up in our model and stuff. So for a syntax example, in Python, we will start with a small optimization model. We have our objective function here. We're trying to maximize our objective function, which is 40 times x, our first decision variable, plus 30 times y, second decision variable. And then we have a set of constraints on what values or combinations of values decision variables and take. So the first thing that we want to do is put to import Iomo. Iomo environment so that we can set up our parameters, constraints, and then we have the function. So here I'm going to put the Iomo environment as EP. Then I'm going to set up a model. In Python, when I'm creating the model, it's called F. There are my decision variables, X. So my model M has the decision variable X that we declared as a variable, and the name of the variable is non-negative real numbers. What I didn't put here was And write our objective function for the model. That's the model called objective. So I model M has an objective function that corresponds to the mathematical expression 40 times x plus 30 times y. And and most solvers will automatically default to midpoints, but here you're automatic. Update the maximization. Then we have our decision variables. We have the objective function. We need to add some constraints and the we can clear our constraints here and add a statement on solving the model. We're using the open source solver GLPK, but it hasn't been loaded into our environment. We need to load some solvers. I'm going to ask a basic question. What type of optimization model is this one? Linear. Yeah. So if you have experience modeling, we know that we can employ quite a few models to solve that.
Kristen, I haven't used Color before. If we follow the link, are we supposed to have this live?
Yes, you open the Google Colab link, it should be up.
You need to refresh the menu.
The last line of the PDF line.
Right.
PDF line, the last line.
Can you say it again? Or is it like, okay?
Sorry? With the LORER website. I think too.
In this okay, well, we're going to be using open source solvers. So we can take advantage of the coin solver community, which has solvers for linear programs, mixed integer linear programs, non-linear, and global mixed integer. So the way to add that to here, use load our solvers and then choose one to solve this small model. Loaded. And then from our options here, you can choose CLP for the linear solvers. And we have an optimal solution for this small problem with one objective function, 3 constraints, and 2 variables. One option on the syntax, looking at the solution. Import those and so as the optimal solution, we have a decision variable x, which is a value of 20. So you should be able to work from this small example, Kyomo syntax, in order to address this next problem. Formulate the optimization model algebraically to solve this statement. So assume you're an electricity system operator and you're obligated to operate your system at reasonable cost. You want to formulate a deterministic model to solve the optimal daily dispatch schedule of the generators in your system. And we'll use this input data first. So we're not considering yet the transmission grid of this network, but your system consists of a wind power producer that has these production values. You assume that you know what your wind farm is going to produce at all hours of the day. You also have 2 natural gas plants that have a maximum capacity of 100 megawatts. And this is the demand that you need to meet, for hourly demand. So you want to set up a simple model to optimize how you're going to meet that demand with the generators that you have at a reasonable cost. So if we go back to the, I'll put this in the formula, the data, and we can start working on a model correlation. Say at 11, we'll review the model correlation. The problem statement for that question was really just to develop a small economic dispatch model where you're minimizing the cost of power production. So you have your 3 generators, 2, and you want to produce power across 5 generators that meets your command at every hour of the day at a minimum cost. You have a maximum generations from the natural gas plants at 115 megawatts, and then your wind plant, this varies by hour as well. Maximum expected production wind. So starting from that simple model, now we want to add in Canada's clean electricity regulations. So these came into force in December 2024, and you can find all regulations in Canada printed on the Canada Gazette. I invite you to read the 300 pages related to the CPR. But there are 2 aspects that really apply to formulating these as the optimization constraints. So one of the main is that the unit will generally emit calendar year quantity of carbon dioxide that exceeds the limit. And this limit is attributed to section 12, expressed in tons. And this applies to electricity generating capacity of at least 25 megawatts. So in the code or the regulation, we have a formula for the emission limit. The emission limit for each generator is a capacity C, times the emission limit, in fact, known as IPL, times 8,760 hours per year, times this factor that per gigawatt. So in the code, the emissions intensity for a calendar year is 75 tons of CO2 per gigawatt effort for the period of 2035 to 2049. And this is the code we want to model. But the code also is 0 after that, after changing it. The other interesting aspect of the regulation refers to how you're calculating the generator's capacity. So a capacity is the maximum level of power or the maximum continuous rating. So it's not necessarily the installed capacity of the unit, it's how often you operate it. So if you're operating at more than 25, from a small unit where you're operating cumulatively 25 megawatts or more, this emissions limit applies to you. So the challenge is to figure out how to convert those two statements into some constraints in this optimization model that converts these clean electricity regulations into emission limits. Does anybody have any initial ideas? Yeah.
Would it be and over B and not B over N here? It looks like the number of places are given that's 0, then your capacity would change. Is that wrong?
Yeah. So it's made. So I'm. So we do have a finite number of days in the calendar year.
So the more you use your unit, the less it has capacity in that formula. That's all.
So we have the generating capacity of the unit at 9% of the calendar year. So I sit and find days and do like that is days. Formulation they would like to offer, or some thoughts on this. Michael, able to grapple with the challenge of wording words into the mathematical formulas. A lot of this text is directly from the regulations, so it's written in a little bit of a legalese, I would say. And that you have to figure out how you want to what makes sense for your question. So the way that I did it, and the classic way to think about kind of if statements is to add binary variables to the optimization model. So if we have a generator that is producing more than 10 megawatts over the hours in this model. So I ignored the annual constraint, and for this example, I just used the 24 hours of this economic dispatch model. So over the 24 hours, if it's greater, the production is greater than 25. We use a binary variable to say if that's true, then this emissions limit also has to be enforced. So we have a second binary variable that enforces the emissions limit on the generator. And if we remember our formulation of this model for our example here. We have one wind generator, so it emits no carbon dioxide, and two gas generators that will have carbon dioxide. So that means these two generators are going to be analyzed for any CO2 that they emit, or they're going to be subject to those carbon dioxide. And in order to, so we have two binary variables, y1 and y2, but then there are also indexed by each generator that we make for natural gas generators. And the third is the that enforces the logic. So if we have one straight one is true, then constraints two is also true. So when we go back to regulations. So we have our general model formulation for economic dispatch, but also including those constraints on limits. It's the same type of model. This wind farm was modeled after one south of Ottawa for real production. We have emissions factors for natural gas that are in tons per megawatt hour. And the emissions limit or the emissions intensity that is codified into the regulations is 0.065 tons per megawatt. So we add the parameters, and then we add our binary variable for net zero constraints. If our generator is generating more than equal 25 or more, then we need to enforce this. So we can solve. Okay. Question here then is, what type of we have we're going to use these binary variables, and what type of optimization model have we used?
MINP.
Yeah, so these are we introduce integer variables for sure. Is it a linear program? Yeah, where because the production can also vary, and structure for each generator is a decision variable. So multiplying these two together, we made we formulated a nonlinear program, a mixed integer nonlinear program. You try and solve this. We have only a few options. Anybody like commercial solvers that you would go to? You could use Adobe, or in our group lab notebook, we'll use the open source on their line. So this one, lines are structured like graph type methods with the nonlinear optimization methods of interior points. So you can, it technically will solve to the last one, or our challenge that we're going to end up facing in trying to solve this problem is related to the formulation and our what's in our system already. So we have two gas plants. We have a wind plant at zero emissions, but this wind plant is significantly contributes significantly lower than the grant. So when we enforce our emissions limits, this formulation of the model that I made is we're saying these equations here require our supply, the production has to meet demand. We don't have any generators in the system that meet the demand. With according to the equation, it's something that needs generator. But we can serve some of this net zero load using the wind generator and 45 megawatts of each natural gas. So that is how would you reformulate this model in order to figure out how to meet the load underneath the yeah, this is an economic impact model where we haven't subject to the equation and that. Right? All of the generation has to meet the demand. We have these efficiency things that we only have currently wind to meet the demand. So if you want to make this version of the model feasible, then you need to allow for some. I think the digit variable that can allow for loss load. So if we reduce load, and then you will be able to solve this problem. What you'll find is that you get so our emissions will get out of PG 1 and PG 3. So we're going to tell most of the load except for what we can meet within and 25 megawatts of these. Subject to the cost of the generators. In Coca-Cola, $60 per megawatt hour. And generator is $60. So we can adjust this in your objective function. Minimizing variable costs. Well, you can assign a value of loss load. And then do this curtailment parameter allowing for dropping demand that we can't meet. And you can then calculate how much this is going to cost you as a system operator. Or this and what probably interesting or useful value with that parameter. This is going to be some dollars per megawatt. Do we have an idea of how much consumers value service? What people will tell you in an emergency situation or their stated value of electricity supply can be up to $1,200 more. So when people suffer car outages because of an disaster or something, they've been interviewed and asked, how much would you pay in order to your electricity on? And people have reported high numbers, $1,200 per kilowatt hour. And in this example of the system operator, converting that to how much load would we can't buy it under the emission limits. You might be able to use this as a reference for investment capacity for that. For capital costs, new investment. Is there another well, any question on this? By more than 55 months. Oh, this one comes from the regulation that if you're a utility operator and you're operating a unit that has a capacity of 25 megawatts or more, then you're going to be subject to these. Oh. That's just what the public policy states, and then the similar reasoning behind a lot of public policy is keeping small independent power producers in business. So if you have a very small plant, but anything less than 25 megawatts is not subject to these emission limits. So you can think of a farmer that has a diesel generator for the farm business, not going to be subject to emission. Small businesses, really small producers, have it, but any producer 25 megawatts or more, you'll do. And if you think that's a reasonable value, it's a question more formulating this policy. No. Whoa. Well, why? You want to explain that a little? Yeah, I'm not very
It's basically taking any generator that's fossil fuel, right? Because 25 seems kind of low as a threshold. From that sense, effective. My opinion could even be a bit higher because who's going to have an install capacity between 25 and 100 that is fossil fuel? Probably not a lot of people.
There's more than you think.
Oh yeah. Oh, like those, okay, like diesels that are for you.
I think most people that
Yeah, sure.
There's a solving one. You just don't have faith and then let's go.
Yeah, yeah, because they would see.
This is a pretty strict limit, and that, I mean, it's going to apply to a lot of generators. But that is also why the first formulation of this policy did not have this set of 65 tons of CO2 per gigawatt hour. From now to 20, that it was originally 0. And then we extended it. So our pretty electricity was supposed to come into effect in 2035. And we've applied what have been considered or deemed more generous emission allowances in this picture of it. But the other political compromise is that 5/2050 has 0. So these numbers have been decided on by actually a lot of cost benefit analysis and other energy economic models. So if you go back to the clean energy regulations, and they're spelled out in the Canada Gazette, You can actually look at there's over 100 pages of modeling from Environmental Climate Change Canada that has their own energy economic model, as well as I think one other energy economic model, one engineering economic model that look at the costs and benefits of this policy to all of Canada. So you can see some of the numbers that, and overall, we quantify the significant benefits for these classifications. Any other thoughts? I think that's just one way to formulate the model, and I would say it's not a typical way. We wanted to look at some challenges that you would face in terms of defining model formulation. So you always want to start with your research question. We didn't really start with the research question here, but if you were trying, you could think of a research question for these clean electricity regulations, and it would be more like, what's the least cost way to make our investments so that we're operating in this net zero group. So instead of a dispatch model, you would probably be looking at a capacity expansion that comes with more integer decision variables. And as we've introduced these integer decision variables here to handle the logic of the regulations, that could be a really computationally tractable problem. So we think about using decomposition techniques to solve it at scale, something that we learned yesterday. All right, so stop there. I will add a little code for this formulation of the model to the Google Colab and review it at your leisure.
Great, thank you very much for this interactive and theory first and then practice. So this will conclude the course for today.